15 brutal things medieval parents did to raise their kids and more. Imagine a world where your toddler was expected to help with the harvest, or your teenager was practically an adult by age 12. Sounds wild, right? But is it tougher than today's world of helicopter parenting and endless screen time? Get ready to challenge everything you thought you knew about raising kids as we pit medieval parents against modern ones. Imagine a playground, not of plastic slides and rubber mulch, but of packed earth and splintery wood. On one side, a medieval knight, his armor dusty from the road, watches his son practice with a wooden sword. The boy is 7. His training began years ago. On the other side of this imaginary playground, a modern parent pushes a stroller, a marvel of engineering with shock absorbers and a 5-point harness. They check a parenting app on their phone, tracking their child's developmental milestones. Who, in this unseen battleground of parenthood, is tougher? Who faces the greater challenge? Tonight, we are going to embark on a long, quiet journey through time. We will be uncovering the surprising truths about the toughest job in any era, and you might be shocked by what we find. The question is not a simple one. Were medieval parents truly tougher, more resilient, more stoic in the face of unimaginable hardship? Or were they just facing a different set of struggles, a different kind of fight for their children's future? And our modern parents, with all their resources and scientific knowledge, actually navigating a world more psychologically complex and demanding than any that came before. Let's dive in and travel back to the heart of the medieval family, and then forward into the living room of our own time to compare, to contrast, and to understand. Part 1. The Two Worlds of Parenthood. To understand the parent, we must first understand their world, the daily realities, the unspoken assumptions, the very air they breathed. All of these things shape the act of raising a child. The gulf between the medieval world and our own is so vast that it can be difficult to comprehend. It is a difference not just of technology, but of mindset, of faith, of the very meaning of life and death. Let us first cast our minds back to the high Middle Ages in Western Europe, roughly between the 11th and 13th centuries. Forget the romanticized images of fairy tale castles and noble quests. For over 90% of the population, life was an intimate and unrelenting struggle with the earth. The world was agricultural, a patchwork of villages and manors bound together by a rigid system of social obligation known as feudalism. Imagine a peasant family waking before dawn. Their home is a small, dark hut, perhaps with only 1 or 2 rooms, constructed of wattle and daub, a mixture of woven lattice, mud, straw, and manure. The floor is packed earth, perhaps strewn with rushes to soak up the damp and grime. A fire pit in the center of the main room provides the only source of heat and light, filling the cramped space with a constant, hazy smoke that stings the eyes and coats the lungs. There are no windows of glass, only small openings with wooden shutters that are kept closed against the cold and the dark. The smell is a thick, organic blend of wood smoke, unwashed bodies, livestock, and damp earth. Often, in the coldest months, the family's precious few animals, a cow, a few chickens, perhaps a pig, are brought inside at night to share the warmth and protect them from predators and thieves. This is the sensory world a medieval child is born into. The family's diet, the very fuel for a child's growth, was monotonous and precarious. The centerpiece of every meal was bread, but it was not the light, airy loaf we know. It was a dark, heavy bread made from rye or barley, often gritty from the millstones. The other staple was pottage, a thick stew of peas, beans, and root vegetables, simmered for hours over the open fire. This was the taste of daily life. Meat was a rare luxury, reserved for feast days, or the occasional windfall of a snared rabbit, an act of poaching that carried severe penalties. The primary source of drink was not water, which was often contaminated and unsafe, but a weak, low-alcohol ale consumed by adults and children alike. For a child, this diet provided just enough calories to survive and work, but it was often deficient in the essential vitamins and nutrients needed for robust growth, leaving them vulnerable to developmental problems and illness. Hygiene, as we conceive of it, was entirely absent. There were no sewers, no running water, no concept of germ theory. People relieved themselves in chamber pots that were simply emptied into the street or a nearby ditch. Waste from both humans and animals accumulated in the narrow lanes of the village, creating a constant, overwhelming stench and a perfect breeding ground for disease. People believed that illness was caused by miasma or bad air, or by an imbalance of the four bodily humors, or by the will of God. A child with a fever was not isolated. They were simply part of a world where sickness was a constant, unpredictable visitor. The rhythm of life was not dictated by a clock on the wall, for there were none, but by the sun and the seasons. The tolling of the church bell marked the hours for prayer and the divisions of the workday. Life was cyclical, repetitive. Spring was for planting, a time of frantic, hopeful labor after the lean months of winter. Summer was for tending the crops, for weeding and praying for rain, but not too much rain. Autumn was the harvest, the most critical time of the year, when every able body, including those of small children, was needed in the fields, from sunup to sundown, to bring in the grain that would mean the difference between survival and starvation. Winter was a time of cold, darkness, and hunger. The days were short, work moved indoors, and families huddled together, rationing their stored food, hoping it would last until the spring thaw. Death was not a distant, sanitized event as it often is today. It was a constant and visible companion. Infant and child mortality rates were staggeringly high. It is estimated that perhaps 1/3, and in some places nearly 1/2, of all children died before the age of 5. Every family knew the pain of losing a child, or multiple children. They died from common illnesses that are now easily preventable or treatable: measles, whooping cough, diphtheria, or a simple bout of diarrhea that would lead to fatal dehydration. A small cut could become infected and led to a slow, agonizing death. And then there were the famines that swept through the land when the harvest failed, and the epidemic diseases, the most terrifying of which, the Black Death, would arrive in the 14th century and wipe out a massive portion of the population. A parent's love for a child was forged in the constant, terrifying knowledge that they could be taken away at any moment by forces utterly beyond anyone's control. The world outside the village was largely unknown and dangerous. Roads were little more than muddy tracks, infested with bandits. Most people lived and died within a few miles of where they were born. Their world was the village, the surrounding fields, the woods where they foraged for nuts and firewood, and the stone church that was the center of their spiritual and social lives. The church was the single most powerful institution in medieval Europe. It was a constant looming presence in every aspect of life. It taught that earthly life was a brief, painful trial, a preparation for the eternal afterlife. Humanity was born tainted by original sin, and only through faith, obedience, and the sacraments of the church could one hope to achieve salvation in heaven and avoid the very real very vivid torments of hell, which were depicted in graphic detail on the walls of the church itself. This worldview profoundly shaped parenting. A child was not just a mouth to feed or a future laborer. They were a soul to be saved. Discipline was not merely about behavior. It was about driving the sin out of a child and setting them on the path to righteousness. For the nobility, life was vastly different, but it had its own set of harsh realities. They lived in cold, drafty castles, built for defense, not comfort. Their diet was rich with roasted meats, venison, boar, swan, and flavored with expensive spices from the east, a display of wealth and power. But their lives were governed by warfare, political intrigue, and the obligations of their rank. A nobleman's primary purpose was to fight, and he trained for it from boyhood. A noblewoman's purpose was to form alliances through marriage and to manage the vast and complex household of a castle, which was less a home and more a military and administrative center. Their children were often seen as assets, pawns in the game of dynastic power. They were loved, yes, but their futures were dictated by the needs of the family line. This was the medieval world, a world of physical hardship, of deep faith, of rigid social hierarchy, and of intimate familiarity with death. It was a world where the community was everything, where survival was a collective effort, and where the line between childhood and adulthood was short and brutally direct. This was the stage upon which the drama of medieval parenting unfolded. Now, let us travel forward in time, across centuries of change, to the world of the modern parent in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. The contrast is jarring, a testament to the most rapid and profound transformation in human history. The modern world, for most in developed nations, is not agricultural, but post-industrial, technological, and global. The rhythm of life is not set by the sun and seasons, but by the 24-hour, 7-day-a-week cycle of a global economy. We wake to an alarm clock, not a rooster. Our homes are not single-room huts, but climate-controlled structures with separate rooms for every function and every individual. We have clean, running water at the turn of a tap and light at the flick of a switch. The fire that once burned in the center of the home, a source of constant danger and labor, has been replaced by central heating and a microwave. Our homes are filled with a dizzying array of objects and technologies that would have been utterly unimaginable to our medieval ancestors. This world is deeply shaped by a consumer culture that has woven itself into the fabric of family life. Parenting, from the moment of conception, is framed as a series of consumer choices. There is immense pressure to buy the right things to ensure a child's safety, development, and social standing. This begins with the high-tech stroller, the ergonomically designed car seat, the video baby monitor, and extends to educational toys, scientifically proven to boost cognitive function, organic, non-GMO baby food, and designer clothing. A child's birthday party can become a competitive event, a curated performance of parental success displayed on social media. This consumerism creates a new form of pressure, linking a parent's love and competence to their purchasing power and their ability to provide their child with the best of everything. The greatest single change is in the realm of health and survival. The invention of antibiotics, vaccines, and modern sanitation has all but eliminated the diseases that once claimed so many young lives. The modern child's life is medicalized from birth. They undergo a rigorous schedule of checkups and vaccinations. Their height and weight are plotted on growth charts. Developmental delays are screened for, and ailments from ear infections to asthma are managed with a sophisticated arsenal of medications. The orthodontist, the allergist, the child psychologist, these are all figures in the modern pantheon of child-rearing specialists. This medical safety net is a profound gift, but it also creates a mindset of constant vigilance and a tendency to medicalize even normal variations in childhood. Our world is saturated with information. The medieval peasant's world was his village. Our world is the entire globe, brought into our homes through television and the internet. A parent today is bombarded with a relentless stream of information, advice, and warnings. They can access thousands of books, articles, blogs, and forums all dedicated to the subject of parenting. They are told about the latest scientific studies on child development, the best methods for discipline, the right foods to feed their children, the right toys to stimulate their brains, and the right activities to ensure their future success. This fire hose of information is both a blessing and a curse. It provides invaluable knowledge, but it also creates a new kind of pressure, a constant anxiety about whether one is doing it right. The medieval parent's guide was tradition, community wisdom, and the priest. The modern parent's guide is a cacophony of competing expert opinions. The structure of the family and community has also been radically transformed. The tight-knit, multi-generational village community has been largely replaced by the more isolated nuclear family, and even that is changing. With a growing diversity of family structures, people are more mobile, often living far from their extended families. The collective responsibility for raising children that existed in the medieval village has been replaced by a more privatized, parent-centric model, supplemented by formal institutions like daycare and school. The proverb, "It takes a village to raise a child," is often quoted today with a sense of nostalgia for a reality that, for many, no longer exists. The economy has shifted from one of subsistence to one of consumerism and competition. The goal for a modern parent is not merely to ensure their child's survival, but to equip them for success in a highly competitive global marketplace. This goal is pursued against a backdrop of large-scale anxieties that the medieval parent never had to contemplate. Modern parents worry about economic instability, the future of the planet under climate change, and political polarization. These vast, abstract threats create a low-grade, chronic stress, a feeling that they are raising their children on precarious ground. And finally, the spiritual landscape has changed. While faith remains important for many, the monolithic, all-encompassing power of the church has receded. Our world is more secular, more individualistic, and more focused on happiness and fulfillment in this life rather than the next. The focus of parenting has shifted from saving a child's soul from original sin to nurturing their psychological well-being, their self-esteem, their emotional intelligence. The primary concerns have moved from the external and spiritual to the internal and psychological. This is the modern world, a world of unprecedented safety, comfort, and information. But it is also a world of psychological pressure, of intense competition, of information overload, and of a strange new form of social isolation. It is a world where parents are expected to be not just providers and protectors, but also amateur psychologists, nutritionists, educators, and cruise directors for their children's lives. This is the stage upon which modern parenting performs its complex and often anxious dance. Two worlds, one of mud, faith, and survival, the other of plastic, data, and achievement. To ask who was tougher is to compare two entirely different species of struggle. Part 2. The very idea of a child. Before we can compare the parents, we must ask a more fundamental question. What, in each of these eras, was a child? The answer is not as simple as a matter of age. The very concept of childhood, as we know it, a distinct, protected, and innocent phase of life, is a relatively modern invention. The way a society defines childhood dictates how it treats its children, what it expects of them, and how it prepares them for the world. In the medieval world, the lines were blurred. The influential, though now debated, theory put forth by the historian Philippe Ariès in the mid-20th century argued that in medieval society, the idea of childhood did not exist. He suggested that as soon as a child could live without the constant care of its mother, it belonged to adult society. They were seen, in essence, as miniature adults. While modern historians have softened this view, pointing to evidence of a distinct understanding of childhood, there is no denying that the medieval experience was profoundly different from our own. Life was divided into rough stages. The first was infancy, from birth until around the age of 7. This was a period of extreme vulnerability. Infants were swaddled tightly, a practice believed to keep their limbs straight and to protect them. They were cared for primarily by their mothers. If the mother was of the nobility, this care was often outsourced to a wet nurse. It was a time of immense physical dependency. Around the age of 7, a significant transition occurred. The child was deemed to have reached the age of reason. They were now considered capable of understanding instruction, of contributing to the household, and of being held accountable for their actions, at least to some degree. This did not mean they were adults, but it did mean their integration into the adult world began in earnest. A peasant boy of 7 would start to work alongside his father in the fields, performing small but necessary tasks, like scaring birds away from the seeds, gathering firewood, or tending to the livestock. A girl of the same age would work with her mother in the hut and the garden, learning to spin wool, cook, bake bread, and care for younger siblings. For children of artisans, this might be the age they began to learn the rudiments of their father's trade. Their play was not entirely separate from their work. Toys existed, simple dolls, wooden animals, balls, and spinning tops. But much of their social life and learning occurred through the imitation of adult activities. Their world was not a sanitized, child-proofed environment. It was the adult world, with all its dangers, its coarse language, and its harsh realities. They were present for births, for the slaughtering of animals, and for deaths. There was little concept of sheltering children from the fundamental facts of life and death. The next stage, what we might call adolescence, began around age 12 for girls and 14 for boys. These were the legal ages of consent for marriage, and, in some contexts, the age at which one could be held fully responsible for a crime. It was at this point that a young person often left their home to begin their formal training for adult life. A boy might be sent to another household to become an apprentice to a master craftsman. A girl might be sent to serve in a wealthier household to learn the skills of domestic management before her marriage. A boy of noble birth would be sent to a lord's castle to serve as a page, beginning his long training for knighthood. Adulthood was not marked by a specific birthday, but by the assumption of adult roles. For most, this meant marriage and the establishment of one's own household. While the legal age for marriage was young, for the peasantry, economic reality meant that most did not marry until their mid-20s, when they had the means to support a family, often by inheriting land or a trade. So, while a 14-year-old was no longer considered a child, he was not yet a fully independent adult either. He occupied a transitional space, an apprentice in life, learning the skills he would need to survive and take his place in the social order. The idea of adolescence as a time of emotional turmoil, identity searching, and rebellion against parental authority, a cornerstone of our modern understanding, was largely absent. It was a time of practical preparation. A teenager was, for all intents and purposes, a junior adult. Now, let us turn to the modern conception of childhood. It is a world away. If the medieval child was integrated into the adult world from a young age, the modern child is deliberately segregated from it. Modern childhood is seen as a unique and precious developmental stage that must be protected, nurtured, and scientifically managed. We have medicalized and psychologized childhood to an extraordinary degree. From the moment of birth, a modern child is a subject of intense scrutiny and measurement. They are weighed, measured, and vaccinated. Their development is tracked against standardized charts of physical, cognitive, and emotional milestones. Parents worry if their child is not crawling, walking, or talking by the correct age. The field of developmental psychology has provided a detailed roadmap of childhood, dividing it into distinct stages: infancy, toddlerhood, preschool, middle childhood, adolescence, each with its own set of needs, challenges, and characteristics. The core belief underpinning modern childhood is the idea of innocence. Children are seen as being born pure and impressionable, and it is the primary duty of the parent and society to protect this innocence for as long as possible. We create a separate world for them, a world of child-friendly media, brightly colored toys designed to be educational, and sanitized playgrounds with soft surfaces to prevent injury. We carefully filter the information they receive, shielding them from the harsh realities of violence, death, and the complexities of adult life. The contrast with the medieval child who witnessed the daily slaughter of the pig for dinner could not be more stark. Education is the defining institution of modern childhood, where the medieval child learned by doing, by participating in the work of the household. The modern child learns in the formal, structured environment of a school. This period of education has been progressively extended. A century ago, schooling might have ended after the elementary years for many. Today, it extends through high school and, increasingly, through college and beyond. This has the effect of prolonging the period of dependency, pushing the transition to full adulthood, well into the 20s for many. A 20-year-old in the Middle Ages might be a married parent and a seasoned farmer or craftsman. A 20-year-old today is often still considered a kid, a student, financially dependent on their parents, still in the process of preparing for adult life. Adolescence, in the modern world, has become a distinct and often fraught stage of life. In its own right, it is no longer just a practical training period, but a time of profound psychological and social transition. It is understood as a time for identity formation, for questioning authority, for peer group bonding, and for emotional upheaval. The modern teenager is expected to navigate a complex social world of school cliques, social media, and romantic relationships, all while under intense academic pressure to prepare for their future. This modern construction of the teenager as a turbulent, identity-seeking individual simply had no real parallel in the medieval world. The ultimate goal of modern parenting is often framed in psychological terms. The aim is to raise a child who is happy, confident, resilient, and emotionally intelligent. This focus on the child's inner life, on their self-esteem and psychological well-being is a product of our modern, individualistic culture. A medieval parent was concerned with their child's physical survival and spiritual salvation. A modern parent is concerned with their child's emotional health and future success. So we have two fundamentally different blueprints for the first 2 decades of life. The medieval model was one of integration and practical preparation. The modern model is one of segregation, protection, and psychological development. The medieval child was an apprentice adult. The modern child is a project to be managed. Neither approach is inherently better or worse, but they are born of entirely different worlds with entirely different priorities for what it means to create a new human being. The toughness required of a medieval child was to grow up fast and contribute to the family's survival. The toughness required of a modern child is to navigate a prolonged and psychologically complex journey to an adulthood that seems to begin later and later. Part 3. A world of dangers then and now. Every parent in every era lives with fear. The nature of that fear, however, changes with the world around them. To be a parent is to be intimately aware of all the things that can harm your child. For the medieval parent, these dangers were overwhelmingly physical, immediate, and ever-present. For the modern parent, while physical dangers have receded, they have been replaced by a new landscape of threats, many of them psychological, insidious, and difficult to combat. Let us return to the medieval hut. The greatest fear, the one that overshadowed all others, was the simple fact of survival. The death of a child, particularly in infancy, was not a shocking anomaly. It was a grimly expected feature of life. Imagine a mother giving birth on a straw mattress on the earthen floor. There is no medical knowledge of germs or sanitation. The risk of infection for both mother and child is astronomical. If the baby survives the birth, the first few years are a gauntlet of peril. The leading killer was disease, in forms we now barely worry about. Contaminated water or food could lead to dysentery, causing severe diarrhea that would quickly dehydrate a small body beyond recovery. Malnutrition was a constant reality for the peasantry. A lean winter or a failed crop meant that children were chronically underfed, their bodies weakened and unable to fight off infection. Their immune systems were a fragile defense against a world teeming with pathogens. Diseases like measles, smallpox, diphtheria, and scarlet fever swept through villages, and children were the most vulnerable victims. There were no vaccines to protect them, no antibiotics to treat them. A fever was a terrifying event, fought with folk remedies, prayers, and a helpless sense of dread. Parents would watch their children burn with fever, waste away, or struggle for breath, with little they could do but offer comfort and pray for a miracle. Beyond disease, the home and the world outside were filled with physical hazards. The central fire pit, essential for warmth and cooking, was a constant danger to a crawling infant or a curious toddler. A moment of inattention could lead to a horrific burn. Outside the hut, the village was a landscape of risk. Children could fall into wells and drown. They could be kicked by a horse or gored by an ox. As soon as they were old enough to work, they were exposed to the dangers of that labor. A boy helping his father in the woods could be injured by a falling branch or an errant axe swing. A girl working in the home could be scalded by a pot of boiling water. Life was physically brutal. The work was demanding, and even children were expected to perform tasks that would be unthinkable today. This labor wasn't seen as abuse. It was a necessity for the family's survival. A child who did not contribute was another mouth to feed without return. This constant exposure to physical hardship, danger, and the raw facts of life and death forged a certain kind of resilience, but at a terrible cost. The medieval parent's primary battle was a defensive one, a fight against the elemental forces of hunger, disease, and accident. Their toughness was the toughness of endurance, of accepting loss as inevitable, and of finding the strength to carry on, to have another child, to continue the cycle of life in the face of relentless death. Now, let us step into the modern home. The physical dangers of the medieval world have been almost entirely vanquished. Our homes are child-proofed with socket covers and safety gates. The water is clean, the food is plentiful, and a fever is usually managed with a dose of children's ibuprofen and a call to the pediatrician. The elemental battle for survival has, for most in the developed world, been won. But this victory has not eliminated parental fear. It has simply changed its address. The modern parent's fears are more often focused on threats that are internal, social, and psychological. One of the greatest sources of anxiety is the pressure for achievement. The modern world is intensely competitive. From a very young age, children are placed on a track toward future success. Parents worry about their children getting into the right preschool, which will lead to the right elementary school, which will lead to the right high school, and ultimately to the right college and the right career. A child's performance on standardized tests can feel like a verdict on their entire future. This relentless academic pressure can lead to significant stress and anxiety for children, manifesting as sleep problems, eating disorders, and a pervasive fear of failure. The medieval child's future was largely predetermined by their birth. The modern child's future is presented as a vast field of choice, but that choice comes with the immense pressure to choose correctly and to succeed. The rise of digital technology and social media has introduced a new and bewildering set of dangers. The medieval village was a closed community. The modern child with a smartphone has access to the entire world, with all its wonders and its darkness. Parents today must contend with threats their own parents never dreamed of. Cyberbullying can follow a child home from school, invading the supposed sanctuary of their bedroom 24 hours a day. Online predators pose a constant, invisible threat. Children are exposed to idealized and unrealistic images of bodies and lifestyles on social media, leading to profound issues with self-esteem, body image, and the feeling of fear of missing out, or FOMO. Their social lives are played out in a complex digital arena where every post, every picture, every comment is subject to public judgment. The medieval child learned their social skills face to face, in a small group of people they knew their whole lives. The modern child must learn to navigate a disembodied social world that is often lacking in empathy and context. This new digital landscape contributes to a growing crisis in child and adolescent mental health. Rates of anxiety, depression, and self-harm have been rising steadily. The modern parent is now tasked with monitoring not just their child's physical health, but their fragile and often hidden mental and emotional state. They must become amateur therapists, learning to recognize the subtle signs of psychological distress. The toughness required here is not one of physical endurance, but of emotional attunement, of having difficult conversations, and of navigating a mental health care system that is often overwhelmed and difficult to access. There is also a paradox in modern safety. In our quest to protect our children from all physical harm, we may be inadvertently harming their development in other ways. The decline of unstructured, unsupervised outdoor play is a well-documented phenomenon. Children today spend far less time just playing outside than any previous generation. Their play is often scheduled, supervised, and structured. This is driven by legitimate fears of traffic, crime, and injury. However, psychologists and educators argue that this overprotection can have negative consequences. It is through taking small risks, resolving their own conflicts, and navigating the world on their own terms that children develop resilience, problem-solving skills, and independence. The modern parent is caught in a bind. The desire to keep their child perfectly safe can conflict with the child's need to experience the world and develop the skills to handle its challenges. The medieval parent fought a war against death. It was a tangible, physical battle. The modern parent is more like a counter-espionage agent, fighting a war against invisible forces, social pressure, digital influence, psychological distress. The medieval parent's toughness was the stoicism to bury a child and carry on. The modern parent's toughness is the vigilance to spot the signs of a panic attack, the courage to confront a cyberbully, and the stamina to navigate a world that is changing at a dizzying pace. The threats are different, but the primal fear for a child's well-being remains the same. Part 4. The Path to Adulthood. The ultimate goal of parenting, in any age, is to prepare a child for adult life. The skills, knowledge, and character traits required for adulthood, however, are dictated by the world the child will inherit. The methods of education and preparation in the medieval and modern eras were, therefore, fundamentally different, tailored to produce two very different kinds of adults. In the medieval world, education was, for the vast majority, an informal and deeply practical affair. It was a system of learning by watching, doing, and absorbing. There were no classrooms, no textbooks, no grades for the peasant child. Their school was the field, the forest, and the home. Their teachers were their parents, their older siblings, and their neighbors. From the moment a boy reached the age of reason, around 7, his education was an apprenticeship in farming. He would follow his father into the strips of land the family cultivated. He would learn the names of the tools and how to care for them. He would learn the rhythms of the agricultural year, the precise time for plowing, for sowing the seeds, for weeding, and for the all-important harvest. He learned to read the weather, to understand the soil, and to manage the oxen that pulled the heavy plow. This was not abstract knowledge. It was a matter of survival. A mistaken judgment could mean a smaller harvest and a hungrier winter. His education was physical, sensory, and immediate. He learned the heft of an axe, the feel of the soil, and the smell of rain on the wind. Similarly, a girl's education was an apprenticeship in domestic economy. She worked at her mother's side, learning the vast and complex set of skills required to run a medieval household. She learned to cook over an open fire, to bake bread in the communal village oven, to brew ale, which was a staple of the diet. She learned to preserve food for the winter through salting, smoking, and drying. A crucial part of her education was the production of textiles. She would learn to card wool, to spin it into thread using a drop spindle, and to weave that thread into coarse cloth on a simple loom. Clothing was precious and labor-intensive, and the ability to produce it was a vital skill. She also learned to care for the smaller livestock, like chickens and geese, to tend the small garden plot that provided vegetables and herbs, and critically, to care for her younger siblings. She was a mother in training from a young age. For the artisan class in the growing towns and cities, education was more formalized through the system of apprenticeship. Around the age of 12 or 14, a boy would be legally bound to a master craftsman through a detailed contract called an indenture. This document would be painstakingly written out, outlining the obligations of both parties. The boy's family would often have to pay a fee to the master, an investment in their son's future. The contract would specify the duration of the service, typically 7 years, and what the master was required to provide. Not just training in the art and mystery of the trade, but also food, lodging, clothing, and moral guidance. The apprentice, in turn, swore to obey his master, to work diligently, and not to frequent taverns or engage in immoral behavior. It was a serious, legally binding relationship. Life for an apprentice was hard. He was the lowest member of the household, performing the most menial tasks. But through this long, slow process of observation and practice, he would acquire a skill that guaranteed his livelihood, culminating in the creation of a masterpiece to prove his skill and qualify him to become a journeyman, and perhaps, one day, a master himself. For a very small, elite minority, another path of education existed. The university. The great universities of Bologna, Paris, and Oxford were emerging as centers of learning, primarily for training the clergy. A young man destined for the church would learn Latin, the language of all scholarship, and then study the 7 liberal arts. This was divided into the trivium, grammar, rhetoric, and logic, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. Life as a university student was not comfortable. They lived in shared, often squalid lodgings, and the curriculum was a rigorous course of lectures and disputations. This path offered one of the few avenues for social mobility for a clever boy from a non-noble family. For the nobility, education was geared toward their specific roles in the feudal hierarchy. A noble boy's destiny was to be a warrior and a leader. His formal education began as a page in the household of another lord. There, he would learn courtly manners, how to serve at table, and the basics of reading and music. Around the age of 14, he would become a squire, assigned to a specific knight. This was the core of his military training. He learned to ride a war horse, to handle a lance, a sword, and a shield. He was responsible for his knight's armor and weapons. He followed his knight into tournaments and into actual battle, learning the brutal art of war firsthand. His education was a hardening process, designed to produce a courageous and skilled fighter. A noble girl, meanwhile, was educated to be the lady of a castle. She learned to manage a large and complex household, to supervise servants, and to handle the estate's finances. She might learn to read and write, often in French or Latin, and would be skilled in music, dancing, and embroidery. Her ultimate purpose was to be a valuable bride in a strategic marriage alliance. Across all classes, religious instruction, provided by the local priest, was a universal component of education. Children learned the basic prayers, the 10 Commandments, and the stories of the Bible. They were taught about the sacraments, the nature of sin, and the promise of salvation. This moral and spiritual framework was the foundation upon which all other learning was built. Now, contrast this with the modern system of education. It is formal, institutionalized, and, for the first dozen or so years, compulsory for all. The primary place of learning is not the home or the workshop, but the school. The curriculum is not practical and immediate, but abstract and standardized. Children sit in classrooms and learn subjects like mathematics, literature, history, and science. The goal is not to teach them a specific trade, but to provide them with a broad base of knowledge and a set of cognitive skills: critical thinking, communication, problem solving, that are deemed necessary for success in a complex, information-based economy. The modern child's life is dominated by this educational process. Their days are structured by school bells and class schedules. Their evenings are often filled with homework. Their performance is constantly measured through a relentless cycle of tests, quizzes, and grades. The entire system is often oriented around high-stakes standardized tests, which are used to evaluate students, teachers, and schools. A vast test preparation industry has grown up around these exams, adding another layer of pressure and anxiety to the lives of children and their parents. Beyond the core curriculum, modern education is supplemented by a vast array of extracurricular activities. Where the medieval child's free time was filled with chores or unstructured play, the modern child is often enrolled in organized sports, music lessons, dance classes, language clubs, or coding camps. These activities are seen as crucial for developing a well-rounded individual, for teaching teamwork and discipline, and for building an impressive resume for college applications. This can lead to a highly scheduled and often stressful childhood, a stark contrast to the organically paced learning of the medieval era. The role of the parent in this system is not that of a primary teacher of practical skills, but of a manager, a supporter, and an advocate. The modern parent must navigate the school system, help with homework they may not understand, communicate with teachers, and ferry their children between various activities. They are the support crew for their child's educational career. This long and intensive process can lead to a strange paradox. A young adult may emerge from 2 decades of formal schooling with a deep knowledge of calculus and literary theory, yet lack the basic practical skills: how to cook, how to manage money, how to make simple repairs, that a medieval teenager would have mastered as a matter of course. This has led to the modern phenomenon of failure to launch, where young adults struggle with the transition to independence and the rise of adulting classes that teach the very life skills that were once learned naturally in the course of growing up. So we see 2 radically different philosophies of preparation. The medieval system was one of direct transmission, a hands-on apprenticeship for a known future. It was efficient, practical, and deeply integrated into the fabric of daily life. The modern system is one of abstract knowledge and cognitive skill building, a prolonged, institutionalized preparation for an unknown future. It offers unprecedented opportunities for social mobility and personal fulfillment, but it also creates new forms of pressure and anxiety for both the child who must perform and the parent who must manage the journey. The path to adulthood is no longer a short, well-trodden track from the family hut to the next plot of land, but a long, complex, and often bewildering highway with many possible exits. Part 5. The Heart of the Matter: Discipline and Affection. At the core of any parent-child relationship lie 2 fundamental forces: discipline and affection. How a society balances these 2, the methods it uses to guide a child's behavior, and the ways it expresses love, reveal its deepest beliefs about human nature. Here, the chasm between the medieval and modern worlds is perhaps at its most profound, rooted in starkly different understandings of the child's soul and mind. The medieval approach to discipline was shaped, above all, by the Christian doctrine of original sin. The belief was that all humans were born with a flawed nature, an innate tendency toward evil inherited from Adam and Eve's disobedience in the Garden of Eden. A child was not a blank slate or a vessel of pure innocence. They were a soul in peril, and their natural will, if left unchecked, would lead them down a path to sin and damnation. The primary duty of a parent, therefore, was to break this sinful will and bend it toward obedience and righteousness. This belief system sanctioned, and indeed demanded, the use of physical punishment. Spare the rod and spoil the child was not just a folk saying, it was a deeply held moral conviction, reinforced by sermons from the pulpit. Medieval texts and manuals for parents and teachers are explicit in their advice. They instruct parents to use the switch or the rod, not in anger, but with a sense of solemn duty, to correct a child's faults before they could take root and endanger their immortal soul. This was not necessarily seen as an act of cruelty, but as a necessary act of spiritual surgery, performed for the child's own good. The goal was to instill obedience to parents, to the lord of the manor, to the priest, and above all, to God. In a rigid, hierarchical society where survival depended on everyone knowing their place and following the rules, obedience was the paramount virtue. Discipline was not limited to physical correction. It also involved the use of fear and shame. Children were told vivid and terrifying stories about the torments of hell that awaited sinners. Misbehavior might be punished by public shaming within the village, a powerful tool in a community where everyone knew everyone else, and reputation was everything. These methods were designed to create a strong internal sense of right and wrong, founded on a fear of divine and social retribution. However, to paint the medieval family as devoid of affection would be a profound misreading of history. Despite the harsh realities and the stern disciplinary climate, evidence of deep parental love abounds. We find it in the legal documents where parents made careful provisions for their children's futures in their wills. We see it in the surviving letters between family members, which often express deep concern and tenderness. We see it in the art and literature of the period, which, while often formal, still contains depictions of loving family interactions. Grief, too, is a powerful indicator of love. While the high rate of child mortality must have led to a certain emotional guardedness, there is no doubt that parents mourned their lost children deeply. Funerary monuments for children, while rare for commoners, show the sorrow of noble and wealthy parents. Folk traditions and religious practices surrounding the death of a child also point to a profound sense of loss. The love was real, but it was expressed within a world that was hard and unforgiving. Affection had to coexist with the constant possibility of loss and the stern demands of religious duty. Now, let us turn to the modern parent-child relationship. The foundational beliefs have been completely upended. The doctrine of original sin has been largely replaced by the psychological theories of the 20th century. The guiding principle is no longer the salvation of the soul, but the healthy development of the psyche. If one person's work could be said to define this shift, it is that of John Bowlby and his development of attachment theory. This theory, which became widely influential in the latter half of the 20th century, proposed that a child is born with an innate need to form a strong emotional bond with a primary caregiver. The quality of this bond, whether it is secure or insecure, shapes the child's emotional and social development for their entire life. A child with a secure attachment learns that the world is a safe place, that they are worthy of love, and that they can trust others. This single idea revolutionized parenting. The focus shifted from controlling a child's will to nurturing their emotional needs. The ideal parent was no longer the stern disciplinarian, but the sensitive, responsive caregiver who was attuned to their child's cues. The importance of cuddles, of comfort, of soothing a crying baby was elevated from a simple act of kindness to a crucial component of building a healthy brain and a secure personality. In this new framework, discipline is a far more complex and debated topic. This has given rise to a vast and often bewildering parenting industry. Parents today are faced with a dizzying array of competing philosophies and gurus, each offering a supposedly foolproof system: authoritative parenting, gentle parenting, attachment parenting, conscious parenting. This endless stream of advice, while often well-intentioned, can create immense self-doubt and guilt. Parents can feel that they are constantly failing to live up to the impossibly high standards of being perfectly patient, emotionally available, and consistently responsive. The rejection of physical punishment is a central tenet of this modern approach. It is widely condemned by child development experts, who argue that it is not only ineffective, but also harmful to a child's emotional well-being. In its place, a model of positive discipline has emerged. This approach focuses on teaching and guiding rather than punishing. It emphasizes clear communication, setting firm but respectful limits, understanding the reasons behind a child's misbehavior, and using tools like natural consequences and time-ins rather than time-outs. It is a far more demanding and nuanced approach, requiring immense patience and self-control from the parent. The intense focus on the child's psychological state can also create a new set of challenges, as parents may struggle to set necessary boundaries for fear of causing emotional harm or damaging their child's self-esteem. The central project of modern parenting has become the cultivation of the child's emotional well-being. We want our children to have high self-esteem. We teach them to identify and express their feelings. We encourage their individuality and self-expression. We worry about their happiness and strive to protect them from emotional harm. The modern parent is expected to be their child's emotional coach, their confidant, and their biggest cheerleader. This profound shift from spiritual salvation to psychological health represents one of the greatest divides between the medieval and modern parent. The medieval parent's toolkit for discipline was simple and direct, backed by the full authority of society and religion. The modern parent's toolkit is complex, filled with competing theories, and a constant pressure to be emotionally present and perfectly patient. The medieval parent's expression of affection was tempered by the harshness of the world. The modern parent's expression of affection is seen as the very foundation of a child's future success and happiness. The toughness of the medieval parent was to inflict necessary pain for the sake of the soul. The toughness of the modern parent is to manage their own frustrations and anxieties in order to provide a consistently nurturing and positive emotional environment for the sake of the psyche. Part 6. The Village and the Web. No parent raises a child in a vacuum. They are always embedded in a wider network of family, community, and social institutions that support, shape, and sometimes interfere with their parenting. The nature of this support system, the village that it takes to raise a child, has been as radically transformed as every other aspect of life we have examined. The medieval world was, at its heart, a world of community. For the peasant majority, the village or manor was the entire universe. This was a world of intense proximity and interdependence. Families lived in each other's pockets. Privacy, as we understand it, did not exist. The walls of the wattle and daub huts were thin, and life spilled out into the communal spaces of the village. The physical and social center of this world was the parish church. This stone building was more than just a place for Sunday worship. It was the heart of the community, the one truly public building. Its porch was where legal agreements were witnessed and disputes were settled. The churchyard was where markets were sometimes held. The nave of the church itself might be used for community meetings or even for storing grain. For a child, the church was a constant central presence in their life, a symbol of both divine authority and community solidarity. This had profound implications for child rearing. A child was, in a sense, the responsibility of the entire village. While the parents had primary authority, all the adults in the community would have known the child by name and by their family lineage. A child's identity was inseparable from their family's reputation. They would have watched them grow and would not have hesitated to scold them, help them, or report their misdeeds to their parents. Children played in mixed-age groups in the village green or the lanes between the houses under the informal, watchful eye of the community. This collective supervision provided a layer of safety and social control. The household itself was often a more crowded and diverse place than the modern nuclear family. It was not uncommon for grandparents, unmarried aunts or uncles, or orphaned nieces and nephews to live under the same roof. Furthermore, for artisan or noble families, the household would also include apprentices, servants, and pages. A child grew up surrounded by a wide range of people of different ages and social roles, learning from all of them. The extended family was not a group of relatives you saw on holidays. They were part of the daily fabric of life, providing childcare, passing on knowledge, and offering support. A unique and vital role in this support network was played by godparents. At the baptism of a child, the parents would choose godparents who made a sacred vow to be responsible for the child's religious education. But their role often went far beyond that. The bond between a godparent and a godchild was a powerful form of spiritual kinship, a social connection that could be as strong as a blood tie. A godparent was expected to be a mentor, a protector, and a source of support throughout the child's life. In a world where a parent's early death was a distinct possibility, having godparents was a crucial form of social insurance for a child. It was also common, especially among the upper classes, for children to be raised for a time outside their own home. This practice, known as fosterage or wardship, involved sending a child to live in the household of another family, often one of higher social standing. This was done to provide the child with a better education, to build valuable social alliances between families, and to teach the child the manners and skills they would need in their adult life. While it may seem strange to us, the idea of sending a child away was not seen as a rejection, but as an investment in their future. Now, let us turn to the modern world. The dense, interdependent community of the medieval village has largely disappeared, replaced by a society that is more mobile, more private, and more individualistic. The primary unit of child rearing is the nuclear family. 2 parents, or increasingly, a single parent, and their children. This shift has placed an immense burden on the shoulders of parents. The very architecture of modern life often enforces this isolation. Suburban homes are designed for privacy, with fences dividing yards and attached garages allowing people to move from their car to their home without ever interacting with a neighbor. The decline of the third place, the local shops, community centers, and parks where people once gathered informally, has further eroded the casual social connections that build a community. Without the constant informal support of a village and a large, cohabiting extended family, parents are often left to manage the enormous task of child rearing on their own. The physical and emotional work of caring for children is more isolated than ever before. Grandparents and other relatives often live hundreds or even thousands of miles away, their involvement limited to phone calls, video chats, and occasional visits. To fill this gap, we have created a new set of formal, institutional supports. Where the medieval child was cared for by a network of kin and neighbors, the modern child is often cared for by professionals in institutions. Daycare centers and preschools have become a necessity for many families, especially as it has become the norm for both parents to work outside the home. The school system has taken on a vast role that goes far beyond academic instruction, providing meals, after-school care, and a primary source of socialization for children. The village has been professionalized. The search for community and support has also moved into the digital realm. The modern parent, feeling isolated in the middle of the night with a sick child, can turn to the internet and find thousands of other parents in online forums, Facebook groups, and parenting blogs. These digital communities can be an invaluable source of information, solidarity, and reassurance. A parent can ask a question about a strange rash or a sleep problem at 3 a.m. and get a dozen replies before sunrise. However, this online village comes with its own set of problems. It can be a source of misinformation and bad advice. It can also be a breeding ground for judgment and competition, a phenomenon often referred to as the mommy wars. Parents are exposed to highly curated, idealized images of other people's family lives, leading to feelings of inadequacy and anxiety. The informal, face-to-face wisdom of the village elders has been replaced by the chaotic, often contradictory, and sometimes toxic chorus of the online crowd. The modern family is a private entity. The idea of a neighbor disciplining one's child, a common occurrence in the medieval village, would be seen by many today as an outrageous and unwelcome intrusion. We raise our children behind the closed doors of our homes, creating a private world for our family. This privacy offers a degree of freedom and autonomy that would have been unimaginable in the past, but it comes at the cost of the built-in, organic support system of the pre-modern community. The toughness required of the medieval parent was to navigate the complex social obligations and lack of privacy in a tight-knit community. The toughness of the modern parent is to endure the isolation and to build their own village from scratch, patching it together from a patchwork of paid caregivers, school services, distant relatives, and a global, disembodied network of fellow parents on the internet. Part 7. The work of play. Play is often dismissed as a trivial pastime, a mere diversion from the serious business of life. But for a child, play is the serious business of life. It is the primary means by which children learn about the world, practice social skills, and develop their physical and cognitive abilities. The nature of children's play, the toys they use, and the time they have for leisure offer a powerful lens through which to view the values and priorities of a society. In the medieval world, a child's play was deeply intertwined with the world of work and the natural environment. There was no clear-cut distinction between time for learning, time for chores, and time for play. These activities often bled into one another. Toys were simple and often handmade. They were crafted from the materials at hand: wood, cloth, clay, and bone. A boy might have a carved wooden horse or a set of miniature soldiers. A girl might have a rag doll with a simple, stitched face. These toys were not just for amusement. They were tools for rehearsing adult roles. By playing with a doll, a girl practiced the nurturing skills she would one day need as a mother. By playing with a wooden sword, a boy practiced the martial skills he might need as a soldier or simply to defend his home. Even in their play, the social hierarchy was reinforced. The son of a peasant might play at plowing with a stick, while the son of a knight would play at jousting on a hobby horse. Much of medieval play was not centered on objects at all, but was physical, imaginative, and social. Children played games that are still familiar to us today: tag, hide and seek, leapfrog. They also played games like Hoodman Blind, a predecessor of Blind Man's Bluff. They chanted nursery rhymes and sang songs that have been passed down through generations, often with surprisingly dark or political origins hidden within them. They wrestled, ran races, and had contests of strength. Their playground was the natural world, the fields, the streams, and the forests around their village. This unstructured play, free from adult supervision and direction, was crucial for developing physical coordination, creativity, and the ability to negotiate rules and resolve conflicts with their peers. Leisure for the medieval child was not a daily expectation, but a special occasion tied to the religious and agricultural calendar. The year was punctuated by numerous feast days and festivals. These were times when the entire community would cease its labor to celebrate. There would be feasting, music, dancing, and games. These festivals were the highlights of the year, a brief and joyous respite from the daily grind, and a vital part of a child's social and cultural education. They learned the stories, songs, and traditions of their community, and experienced a powerful sense of collective belonging. Now, let us examine the world of modern play. It is, in many ways, a world of paradoxes. On the one hand, modern children have access to an abundance and variety of toys and entertainment that would have been beyond the wildest dreams of a medieval peasant. On the other hand, the very nature of their play has become more structured, more commercialized, and more sedentary. The modern toy industry is a multi-billion-dollar enterprise that markets relentlessly to both children and parents. Toys are often linked to vast media franchises, encouraging a form of play that is less about pure imagination and more about reenacting storylines from movies or television shows. The rise of phenomena like unboxing videos on YouTube has turned the acquisition of new toys into a form of entertainment itself, fueling a cycle of desire and consumerism. A defining feature of modern childhood is the rise of structured, adult-led activities. The unstructured outdoor play of the past has been largely replaced by organized sports, music lessons, and other scheduled classes. This shift is driven by a desire to keep children safe, to develop their skills and talents, and to build their resumes for the future. Even the physical environment of play has been transformed by a focus on safety. The playgrounds of the mid-20th century, with their towering metal slides, asphalt surfaces, and seesaws that could launch a child into the air, have been replaced by low, molded plastic structures on beds of rubber mulch. This obsession with eliminating all physical risk is understandable, but some developmental experts argue that it deprives children of the chance to test their limits, to manage risk, and to learn from their mistakes. The most profound change in the landscape of play has been the advent of digital entertainment. The screen, whether it is a television, a computer, a tablet, or a smartphone, has become the dominant source of leisure for many children. Video games, streaming services, and social media now compete for a child's attention. This digital world offers incredible opportunities for learning, creativity, and social connection. But it also comes with significant downsides. Excessive screen time is linked to a more sedentary lifestyle and health problems like obesity. It can also impact a child's ability to focus, to engage in deep imaginative play, and to develop face-to-face social skills. The simple act of being bored, which can be a powerful catalyst for creativity, is something many modern children rarely experience. There is always a screen available to fill the void. In early childhood education, there is a growing recognition of the importance of play-based learning. Educators and psychologists are pushing back against the trend of early academic pressure, arguing that it is through play that young children best develop the cognitive, social, and emotional skills they need for later success. This movement seeks to reclaim the power of play and place it back at the center of a child's development. The contrast is clear. Medieval play was organic, physical, and integrated into the natural and social world. Modern play is often structured, commercialized, and increasingly mediated by screens. The toughness required of the medieval child in their play was a physical toughness, the resilience to take a fall, the stamina to run all day. The toughness required of the modern child is to navigate a complex digital landscape, to manage the pressures of structured activities, and to find space for genuine, imaginative play in a world that is constantly trying to schedule and entertain them. Conclusion: the verdict on toughness. We began our journey on an imaginary playground with a simple question: who is tougher, the medieval parent or the modern parent? After traveling through these two vastly different worlds, it has become clear that there is no simple answer. The question itself is perhaps flawed, for it implies a single scale of hardship, a single definition of strength. What our journey has revealed is not that one group was tougher than the other, but that each was required to be tough in entirely different ways, to fight entirely different battles. The medieval parent's toughness was a primal, physical fortitude. It was the toughness of the body, the resilience to endure back-breaking labor, chronic malnutrition, and the constant threat of disease. It was the toughness of the heart, the capacity to love a child in a world where that child was more likely than not to be snatched away by illness or accident. It was the toughness of a spirit forged in a fatalistic faith, the ability to accept a world of suffering as a prelude to the next, and to find the strength to continue the cycle of life in the face of overwhelming loss. A medieval mother who buried her fourth child and then went back into the fields to work was tough in a way we can barely comprehend. A father who disciplined his son harshly, believing it was the only way to save his eternal soul, was acting from a place of tough, desperate love. The modern parent's toughness is of a different sort entirely. It is not primarily a physical, but a psychological and emotional stamina. It is the toughness to navigate a world of bewildering complexity and relentless change. It is the toughness to filter an endless deluge of information and advice, to withstand the judgment of an online world, and to manage the pervasive anxiety that comes with the pressure to raise a perfect child. It is the toughness to remain patient and emotionally regulated in the face of a toddler's tantrum, because psychology tells us that our calm response is critical for their development. It is the toughness to monitor a teenager's secret digital life, to talk about mental health, and to advocate for them in a complex and often impersonal educational system. A modern parent lying awake at night, worrying about their child's anxiety or their future in a precarious economy, is engaged in a battle as real and as draining as any faced by their medieval ancestors. And what of the children? The medieval child had to be tough enough to survive infancy, to work from a young age, to face the raw realities of life and death without shelter. Their path was short, direct, and brutal, The modern child must be tough enough to navigate a prolonged and psychologically demanding childhood, to withstand the pressures of academic performance, to construct an identity in the distorting mirror of social media, and to find their way in a world of infinite choice and constant comparison. Their path is long, complex, and filled with invisible hazards. In the end, the question is not who was tougher. The question is, how has the fundamental, timeless challenge of parenthood, the act of raising a helpless infant into a capable adult, adapted to the radically different environments humanity has created for itself? The medieval parent fought a war against nature. They battled hunger, pestilence, and the elements. Their goal was survival and salvation. The modern parent fights a war against the pressures of our own creation. They battle information overload, social competition, and psychological distress. Their goal is success and happiness. Perhaps the greatest lesson from this comparison is one of humility. It is easy for us to look back at the medieval world with a sense of superiority, to see its practices as harsh and ignorant. But they were doing the best they could with the knowledge and the resources they had in a world of unimaginable hardship. They were raising children who were adapted to that world. And perhaps, centuries from now, our descendants will look back at our own parenting practices, our obsession with screen time, our overscheduling of children's lives, our anxieties about self-esteem, with the same sense of bewildered pity. They will see us as people doing the best we could in a world of strange and unprecedented pressures. The unseen battleground of parenthood is not a contest between the past and the present. It is the same eternal struggle, fought on ever-changing terrain. And on that terrain, every parent, in every age, is a warrior, armed with the fierce, enduring, and endlessly adaptable power of their love.